What's the worst thing you've seen a medical professional do? It started when my 7-year-old sister Olive was diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia. The doctors said it had a 90% cure rate in kids. She was supposed to get better, but after 6 months of treatment, her cancer was getting worse. The oncologist Dr. Rothwell kept saying her body was just responding slowly, but something felt wrong. I was sitting in the hospital cafeteria when a mother from our support group sat down next to me looking exhausted. Olive and her daughter had started treatment together. She said something that made my blood run cold. I don't understand why my daughter's getting worse when every other kid with ALL at Children's Hospital is in remission by now. She then mentioned the 3 other kids on our floor with the same diagnosis, and how they weren't improving either. They all had Valerie as their primary nurse, just like Olive and her daughter. She kept talking about how Valerie always insisted on preparing the chemo herself and never let other nurses handle it. She didn't have to say more than that. I knew what she thought was going on, and I was about to believe it too. I went back to Olive's room and watched Valerie more carefully when she came in with the IV bag. She was nervous when I stared at her, and she quickly hooked up the bag and left without her usual small talk. I started tracking every single treatment Olive received and which nurse administered it. Over the next 2 weeks, I realized Olive only got worse after Valerie's shifts, but showed slight improvement when other nurses covered. I wasn't imagining it because her blood counts dropped specifically after Valerie's treatments. I tried telling my parents, but they were so exhausted from spending every night at the hospital that they said I was being paranoid and needed to trust the medical team. My mom actually cried and said I was making this harder for everyone by looking for someone to blame when we should be focusing on supporting Olive. I confronted Dr. Rothwell alone with my observations, and he looked at me like I was insane. He said Valerie was one of their most experienced pediatric oncology nurses, and I was looking for someone to blame for Olive's poor response to treatment. He said the chemotherapy dosing was within protocol ranges, and every bag was verified by the pharmacy. But I knew something was wrong because my baby sister was dying when she should have been getting better. I started talking to other parents whose kids had Valerie, and found out 6 children with treatable cancers had gotten worse under her care. One father told me his son died last year from a cancer that had a 95% cure rate, and Valerie had been his nurse the whole time. He said his son went from running around playing to dead in 4 months, and he'd never understood how it happened so fast. Another mother was sobbing because her daughter just got moved to hospice after 8 months of treatment that should have worked. These kids were dying when they should have been living, and nobody was asking why. I followed Valerie to the parking garage one night and saw her meet with a man in a Mercedes. She handed him something from her bag, and he gave her an envelope that looked thick with cash. My hands were shaking as I took photos with my phone, but they were too dark and blurry to prove anything. When I showed them to my dad, he said I was harassing a nurse who was trying to help Olive and threatened to ban me from the hospital if I didn't stop. I went to hospital administration alone with all my documentation, and they said cancer treatment was complex, and not every child responded the same way. They said Valerie's patients had outcomes within statistical expectations for pediatric oncology. Within statistical expectations, like my sister was just a number on a spreadsheet instead of a little girl who still slept with her stuffed unicorn and wanted to be a teacher when she grew up. The administrator actually pulled out a chart showing survival rates and pointed to the 10% who don't make it, saying Olive was just unlucky. I contacted the DEA tip line and told them I suspected a nurse was diluting chemo drugs, but they said without hard evidence they couldn't investigate based on suspicion. I was watching my sister die in slow motion, while Valerie got rich selling the drugs that should have been saving her. Olive was so weak she couldn't even hold my hand anymore, and she kept apologizing for not getting better, like this was somehow her fault. She didn't understand why the medicine wasn't working when everyone promised her it would. She asked me if she was going to die, and I had to lie to her face while knowing someone was murdering her for money. Dr. Rothwell increased her doses, but it didn't matter because Valerie was stealing most of it before it ever reached my sister's veins. I begged Dr. Rothwell to test the IV bags after administration to check the concentration, but he said that wasn't standard procedure and would be a waste of resources. He actually told me I needed to accept that some children just didn't respond to treatment, and I should focus on making Olive comfortable. Valerie came in that afternoon and actually had the nerve to hug me and say she was praying for Olive, that God must have other plans for her. I wanted to scream that God's plan wasn't for her to steal medicine from dying children, but I stayed silent because I knew that if I didn't do something soon, my sister would be dead and Valerie would still be there, stealing from the next sick child. I spent the next 3 days planning exactly how I was going to prove what Valerie was doing. I installed a hidden camera in Olive's room and waited for Valerie's next shift. What I recorded was going to destroy her and everyone who protected her. Full story on the channel below.